Hey listeners, this Read, Talk, Grow episode is one of our best of series that we will play for the next several weeks. Over the spring, we'll be working hard behind the scenes to create fresh, exciting episodes that will keep you engaged and inspired. Our new content features some fabulous books. Areas of focus will include mental health, cancer, and of course, women's health. We hope you'll enjoy revisiting this conversation. We look forward to seeing you mid-June. Keep reading, everyone. Welcome to the Read, Talk, Grow podcast, where we explore women's health topics through books. In the same way that books can transport us to a different time, place, or culture, Read, Talk, Grow demonstrates how books can also give a new appreciation for health experiences and provide a platform from which women's health can be discussed. At Read, Talk, Grow, we use books to learn about health conditions in the hopes that we can all lead happier, healthier lives. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Millstine. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, where I practice women's health, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. I am always reading and I love discussing books with my patients, my professional colleagues, and now with you. I am so excited about my two guests today. Stacey Swann is an author of the book Olympus, Texas. She holds an MFA from Texas State University and was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. Her fiction has appeared in multiple journals, and she's a contributing editor of American Short Fiction. Her first novel, Olympus, Texas, has received critical acclaim. In addition, Stacey currently leads an Austin-based group focused on the power of narrative to create social change. A native Texan, she splits her time between Austin and her family's ranch, where other than raising cattle, they don't resemble much with the Briscoes, who are the family in Olympus, Texas. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
My second guest today is Dr. Jennifer Vencill. Jennifer is an assistant professor, board certified clinical health psychologist, and AASECT certified sex therapist. She completed her postdoctoral training at the University of Minnesota Medical School's Institute for Sexual and Gender Health. Currently, Dr. Vencill is duly appointed in Mayo Clinic's Department of Psychiatry and Psychology, as well as the Division of General Internal Medicine. She spends the bulk of her time providing integrated sexual health care in the menopause and sexual health clinics. She also works closely with Mayo's Transgender and Intersex Specialty Care Clinic. Dr. Vencill is currently working on her first popular press book, A Guide for Managing Sexual Desire Discrepancies in Relationships, which will be published in summer 2023. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So Stacey, the book Olympus, Texas is just really phenomenal. And you spent a long time writing this book with lots of inspiration. But I had been meaning to read your book for a long time, well, maybe 6 months, which seems like a long time. And I was reading The State of Affairs by Esther Perel. This is a phenomenal nonfiction book about rethinking infidelity, which is such an important topic in my women's health practice. Immediately on the heels of that, I started reading Olympus, Texas, which is affair after affair after affair. Tell us a bit about how you were inspired to write this book and were brave enough to include so many layers of infidelity.
Oh, well, thank you. That's so kind. The inspiration for the novel was actually me thinking about Greek mythology and how I could fuse that onto the myths of Texas, because Texas is a state where everybody really buys into the mythology of the state and everyone feels really larger than life. So I started with that concept and started working on it. And it took a while of working on it before I realized, like, oh no, what you're actually also writing is just a big, messy family novel, like a dysfunctional family novel, really, which should have been no surprise to me because those are often the books and movies and TV shows that I love the most. It's just something that really I am drawn to. So with Greek mythology, infidelity is just baked into so many of the myths. There's a reason for that, right? That it's one of these eternal human problems that come up again and again, that most people in their lives will have some sort of interaction with that and have to deal with the fallout of that on relationships. So yeah, it was just something that came with the idea, but I thought was super interesting to explore as well.
So, Jennifer, you have lots of patients who talk about or deal with infidelity. And one question I wanted to start with you is, what is infidelity? What is cheating?
That's an amazing question because it actually depends on who you ask, right? Something we talk a lot about in sex and relationship therapy is relationship agreements. And so we have a lot of default relationship agreements in our culture, monogamy being one of the strongest, I would say. We have this sort of default understanding that when we partner with somebody, they will be kind of our one and only. And that's a very kind of deeply embedded cultural narrative for us in terms of relationships. That's starting to change as we're seeing more people explore consensual non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, of course. But one of the problems that I certainly see is assumptions of relationship agreements, right? So if we just assume we're all on the same page and we've never talked about it, how do we know what's cheating, right? Is it looking at somebody else? Is it touching somebody else? Is it kissing? Is it full on sexual intercourse? At what level? And I think there are probably some culturally common responses to that, but it really depends on the individual person that you're talking to. It's such a vague and very subjective word to define.
You used a really interesting term, consensual non-monogamy, and I promise we're going to talk about the book, but I just want to highlight this because in the State of Affairs, she talks about relationships where they have that agreement, but you can still have infidelity if you break the agreed upon rules.
Absolutely.
I think she gives the example of them saying they just wouldn't be involved with someone they work with. And then one of the partners does do that. And so that's considered an affair, even though it's a open relationship. Is it okay to use the term open relationship?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So, Stacey, let's talk about all of the characters who are affected by affairs. I know who I want to start with, but is there a character you want to start with?
I love all of the characters, and because it's a family novel, it's hard to think of just a central character. But to me, the heart of the novel is the mother of the family, June. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book is because, Greek mythology has this very male lens. And so when we grew up as kids reading mythology, Hera, wife of Zeus, comes across in a very dark light. She's not going to be someone's hero. Meanwhile, everyone just kind of accepts the fact that Zeus is having affairs, with all sorts of mortals and non-mortals. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to investigate that relationship with more of the woman's lens, of trying to give a sense of how the anger that you would feel in that situation is really justified, and that forgiveness and maybe a lack of working towards forgiveness doesn't mean a relationship ends, but it can really warp a relationship at the same time. So she's kind of what I think of as the heart of the novel.
I'm so glad that you chose June because she is also the person I wanted to start with. So she gets hit by infidelity and participates in it in multiple ways, starting with she's just about to be married. And for our listeners who haven't read the book, we're not going to spoil anything that happens in the middle or the later parts of the book. But we learn early on she's just about to get married to this larger than life man who's well beloved in their small town. And he has an affair immediately before, and she has to make a decision whether she's going to go through with the marriage and forgive him or if she's out. So, Jennifer, you have patients who discover infidelity and have to make this choice. How do you help them with that?
Yeah, I think my heart was breaking throughout this novel. As a therapist reading this, I was like, please, can we get this family into therapy ASAP, right? But yeah, I mean, the wife figure here, such a common experience for folks, of course, right? Her rage and her deep resentment that builds and builds over years. I mean, that's the part for me as a psychologist, as a therapist. I'm like, can we deal with this? Can we get it out? I was so struck by one of the opening scenes where she's pouring coffee through the upper level porch to the bottom level porch, just these jabs of resentment rather than learning the skills to talk about how she's feeling, to talk about how she has been deeply wounded by Peter's behavior, right? And that's not something we're born knowing how to do, and I will often say that to clients and patients that I work with. These are skills. We have to practice them. Most of us don't get good role models growing up about how to talk about very difficult, labeled negative feelings, right? Rage, jealousy, envy, hurt. Those are things that take practice. And I wish somebody had been there to help her through that earlier on.
It's so interesting too, as I talk more just with book clubs and things about this idea of openly talking about these really important things has a cultural element that there's just like there's certain cultures that those things are just not discussed as easily. And I feel like coming out of like the South and the rural South, the kind of grandparents I had and that kind of thing, there's a real stoicism. And part of that stoicism is like when bad things happen, you just buckle down and you get through it. And this idea that somehow in talking about it, you're not moving on, right? That's just not what we do. Yeah, it's really makes everything so much more difficult, which in fiction is good, right? You want to up the drama.
Very dramatic.
Exactly. But that about a year ago, I started therapy myself and was just like, oh, this is so much easier when you are having another person to talk about it. But yeah, even in my own life, I see members of couples that are just really hesitant to go to couples therapy, that just the act of speaking it aloud sometimes I think makes it real in a way that people are afraid of.
Absolutely. I see that a lot as well. Yeah, some of this I think is mental health stigma writ large in our culture. Some of this is not necessarily knowing how therapy can be helpful, right? And the cultural element of when bad things happen, we just sort of deal with it ourselves or with it within the family or within the community. Something that I'm often talking with clients and patients about is how when we don't have a space to process and heal from negative emotions, trauma, resentment. I mean, this was a relational trauma for these two, for multiple couples we see in this book, actually, relational traumas. These feelings, when they get bottled down and kind of pushed to the side, they don't go away usually. They just come out sideways, right? They come out in these little violent acts with the coffee. They come out in the snide remarks, right? They come out in the emotional distancing over time, the losing of the other types of intimacy in the relationship as well. And so it's not like the feelings have actually been processed or handled in any healthy way. They have to come out somewhere.
That was actually like my biggest surprise in therapy was figuring out, and I'm sure this is not wholly universal, but at least for me, that when I was repressing emotions, they actually felt 20 times larger. And just the simple act of not repressing it, did almost the most work, right? There was still work to be done, but it was such a relief. But now in retrospect, I look back at the novel and I'm like, oh, yeah, right. Like June, especially in her relationship with her middle son, March, like she's been repressing so much of the anger at her spouse. And then her feelings for her spouse are tangled up in her feelings about her son, who's engaged in an affair with his brother's wife. And yeah, it really mutates that parent-child relationship again, so much of it because she's just stuffing it all down.
Yeah, just this heartbreaking projection that she does on March, right?
I thought that she thinks she's fine. She's a good mother. She's a good caretaker of the homestead. But also, this ripples out to her relationship with Thea, her oldest child, her daughter, which is heartbreaking. Thea has forgiven her father or maintains a relationship with her father, and yet is constantly at odds with June, where June, in a way, at least at the beginning, it feels like she's done nothing wrong and it's completely unfair, but it is a result of not managing that resentment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things I found so interesting writing about Thea and her mother is something that I feel like I've witnessed a lot and even experienced is as women, we are often harder on our mothers than we are on our fathers. And I think it's because we see our potential futures there, or we project ourselves into that situation and think about what we would do. there's more at stake, right, when looking at your mother's behavior. But it feels also deeply unfair, I think. And I think so many mothers, and even now my friends who have teenagers, right, you're constantly dealing with just different levels of people getting angry in ways that you think are perhaps not fair to you.
I read this too as a really good example of how victims can become victimizers, right? So she was victimized early on by this infidelity, by this broach of the relationship agreement with Peter. But rather than doing the healing, right, she went on to project a lot of that onto other people, mostly her kids, right? So, we sort of see her become a victimizer as she continues on in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other comment I want to make about June is that you speak to how others judge her. So people in her community judge that she stayed. And there is often, particularly in people who haven't been thoughtful about infidelity, this idea that, well, if I was the victim of infidelity, I would just leave. And it is far from that simple. So she not only has to live with the knowledge of what happened, but with people whispering, and in her case, children that are not her biologic children, but are her husband's children in the community. I think that's really important, that we don't know how people are coming to the decisions that they're coming to with their relationships. Jennifer, you can speak much more eloquently about this than I can.
I think that was beautifully put. Really, we don't know what's going on in an individual relationship unless we ask and are told, right? And so to have kind of the gossipy community adding to the trauma of all of this for June, obviously very difficult. And we see how that progresses over the course of this book. Again, the decision to stay, to go, to repair, it's so individualistic depending on the partners and what they need and the nature of the infidelity and the breach in the relationship, right? Some things are much more easily repaired than others.
I think too, I think a lot about how, and it's not just with infidelity, but anything in the world, right? When we look around us in the world and we see that something really bad has happened to another person, it strikes fear in us, right? We're afraid that that could happen to us too. And our brain tries to rationalize that and say, like, well, that wouldn't happen to me because of X, Y, or Z. So the judgment, though it feels really negative to the other person, is actually a form of self-protection, really, that we don't want to believe that our partner would be able to do that to us. And if they did, we want to believe that, like, this is how we would handle it.
Let's talk about another woman involved in an affair for a very different reason. So let's talk about Vera. Vera is June's daughter-in-law. She's married to Hap, who's kind of, at least on the surface, the perfect child. And she has an affair with his brother, who is the black sheep of the family. Talk a little bit about that.
One of those interesting things, like I like when I write to like have kind of like a puzzle that I have to unlock. And so I was taking this basic myth structure, which is that Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus, or it's also Vulcan in Roman mythology, who's like the blacksmith. And she has an affair with Ares, who's the god of war. And, when you break down those structures of mythology, they are brothers, those two. And so there's this actual myth of her getting caught in the affair with Ares because Hephaestus has made this metal chain and throws it over the couple so everyone can see them. My job was to try and figure out how to render that in modern day Texas in a way that felt believable to the people and to the time place. For a while, my hardest problem in writing the novel is, how do I get the reader to believe that Vera would not just have an affair when she has this really kind husband, but also have an affair with his brother, the worst person that you could select in terms of the amount of hurt that you inflict on another person. So it took a while of writing around to kind of get to like what her motives were, why she would select that person, and also have the reader be able to have some sympathy for her at the same time, hopefully. So even as the writer, my relationship evolved from thinking of Vera just as this very beautiful, very mean woman to really coming to like her quite a bit by the end. And it gave me a new view on, you could say that her husband has a bit of a martyr complex, like he's quite often giving up the things he wants to help the people around him. And I think maybe I started writing the novel thinking of that as a much more benign kind of personality, It's something that maybe I sometimes do myself as well. And then coming to see how even that has like a layer of toxicness to it in certain circumstances, that can be really harmful to the other people in that person's life.
It's awesome to hear you talk about the background with Vera, because I experienced her as perhaps one of the most insightful characters in terms of her own motivations and her own psychology. I mean, we get the backstory for multiple characters, of course, as we go, but a lot of it is coming from her first person. And she seems to have perhaps the most awareness of why she is doing the things that she's doing, not exactly out of lust, right? Which is a different type of infidelity.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I think, again, maybe if you don't think about it, you would think affairs or infidelity is usually driven by a sexual desire, but there is a manipulation of the relationship dynamic that can also very much come into play.
Yeah. Trying to think what I can say without giving too much away for the audience here. Yes, I mean, certainly affairs and infidelity, cheating happens from sexual desire and love, like absolutely. Nobody's questioning that for sure. With Vera, she has a very thoughtful reason for the person that she has chosen. And it's not just the family relationship, right? It is the personality difference. It is in some ways a vengeance kind of piece for her experience with her husband and his martyrdom kind of complex. And so she seems quite thoughtful about that, particularly the second time it happens, if I can say that.
Yeah, it's very early in the novel, so I
Okay.
feel like that is not a spoiler.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, so we see her have this very calculated second experience with March, which for the reader, at least for me, was very helpful in kind of seeing, oh, I could have assumed a lot of things about the first round of infidelity. Was that lust? Was that something, kind of spur of the moment? At least the second time around didn't feel like that, right? It was very clear that she had some relational motivations going on.
And that is probably, or maybe not something that people participating in infidelity do intentionally, but it's a type of relationship. I'm talking generally now, but a relationship sabotage that I want this relationship to end. I don't want to leave you. And if I do something, then you leave me. And we've achieved the same result, but I might be the bad person for having had the affair, but you're the one who walked away from the relationship. And that can be a setup.
And some people are very comfortable in that role of, I'm the one that messed it up, so you might as well go, right? If they have a history of kind of deprecating themselves in that way. I think that this really speaks, Denise, to kind of the ultimate of avoidance strategies, right? Like this is such a big example of interpersonal avoidance, right? Of I would like to end this relationship, or I'm thinking that I'm really close to ending this relationship, but I either don't have the skills to say that, don't know how to say that, am afraid to say that. We don't have the type of relationship where I can communicate openly about that. So I'm just going to do all of these other behaviors that are very avoidant and very passive aggressive / aggressive at times to see if I can still get the same outcome.
Okay, another woman. This was so well done. I want to talk about Lee, who's not a huge character in the trajectory of the whole novel. And I should say, this is not a novel about affairs. It's about many other story points, and it's a tragedy. It's obviously based on Greek mythology. But let's talk about Lee. So Lee is the woman with whom Peter has his later affair, and she is the mother of his twin daughters, who June finds out about just before the twins are born. And what I want to talk about is the other woman. We could also, again, thinking of infidelity on the surface, think the other woman, she's a monster. She is a marriage wrecker. She is, this terrible person. And Lee is anything but all of those things.
Mm-hmm. It's a safe emotional reaction for us to do that. It's an othering, right? So this other person has wronged me. My significant other, my spouse, my partner who I care deeply for and have been deeply wounded by, it's much harder to come down on them, right? It's much easier to come down on the third party. And so we see this a lot with affairs.
Yeah, I think it's something I really consciously was trying to push back against, just because like growing up in the culture, right? So often what you see is anger, and I'm thinking in this case just male female relationships where the husband has strayed, and there's an automatic label put on the other woman, and quite often she's the focus of the most anger. As a feminist, that has always bothered me, because I think part of it is just playing into these gender tropes of like what women are supposed to be, and they are supposed to be faithful and they're supposed to seek marriage. And so I wanted to make sure when I wrote that relationship that the reader would see where the blame really should go, that I didn't kind of perpetuate that stereotype in any way.
There's this lovely scene at one point with Lee and Peter and June where I think it's June's character who's sort of observing them all standing in the room together and thinking like, we could actually have been a family here. And as a reader, I was like, yes, why aren't we moving in that direction, please? And I, understand all of the complicated reasons why, but yeah, it was such a touching scene in terms of the three of them and their dynamics.
Yeah, it wound up being, so much in novels you don't really plan, that just kind of, you go in one direction and things play out. And one of the things I really liked by the end of the novel was that while there's so many flaws in this larger family that's been created by multiple infidelities, that there are real connections between the children who are half siblings, and that there are connections between, say, like June and Artie, who is not her blood relative, but is her husband's. And I think it's important to see that reflected, right? Because it is so much in our culture that these larger family units, even when they have dysfunction, as the Briscoes definitely have, that there's really powerful, meaningful family connections to be had, even in these configurations that we don't plan on.
And it brings up for me, how we define family is how we define family, right? Much like cheating and infidelity, it depends on who you ask. Not everybody feels that family has to be blood related. A lot of people don't feel that way, right? Chosen family is much more of a thing these days, and much more appreciated, I think, these days in really healthy ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Found family, it's really important. Jennifer, any other comments from reading the book? I know we didn't even talk hardly about the male characters, except how they pertained.
No, I did my doctoral work in Texas, and so this has nothing to do with the relational side of things, but I could see it. The scenery was done so well. The river and the home, like these big kind of plantation style homes. I lived in rural West Texas for about 5 years doing my doctoral degree. And so I felt particularly drawn to this book because of that. And so it was a joy to read it.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting too. I feel like even since I finished the book, and then it takes a while to be published, but like it's, Texas has got an evolving meaning. We're kind of at the forefront of a lot of the cultural things going on today. And so the book might have been slightly different had I read it today, but I still have so much affection for my home state, even as it deeply frustrates me in many ways. So I do like that, when people read the book, that they really respond to that feeling of Texas that is not just, some of the darker stuff that we're seeing more often lately.
Yeah.
I think this has been a fascinating conversation about infidelity and looking at characters in all these lights. I want to thank you both for participating with me and for being open to talking about a topic that can be really difficult. I hope that everyone will go out and read Olympus, Texas, and next year, summer 2023, they'll read Jennifer Vencill's book, which is also going to be really important for the world. So thank you both again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us to talk books and health today on Read, Talk, Grow. To continue the conversation and send comments, visit the show notes or email us at readtalkgrow@mayo.edu. Read, Talk, Grow is a production of Mayo Clinic Press. Our producer is Lisa Speckhard-Pask, and our recording engineer is Rick Andreessen. The podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed to replace a physician's medical assessment and judgment. Information presented is not intended as medical advice. Please contact a healthcare professional for medical assistance with specific questions pertaining to your own health if needed. Keep reading, everyone.